The alarm pierced through the humid Pacific air like a blade, and I felt every muscle in my body tense as red lights bathed the USS Meridian's Combat Information Center in an ominous glow. 27 years old, and I'd heard that sound in my nightmares more times than I cared to count. But this wasn't a drill. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Contact bearing 027, range 48 nautical miles. Classification hostile surface combatant. The radar operator's voice cut through the controlled chaos. Multiple contacts, sir. Looks like an entire battle group. I stood frozen at my weapons systems console, watching green blips appear on screens that I knew better than my own reflection. Every circuit, every targeting algorithm, every millisecond of missile flight time was burned into my memory from 5 years of maintaining these systems. 5 years of being told that technical expertise was different from tactical command. 5 years of watching less qualified officers make targeting decisions while I stood by as a consultant. My hands trembled slightly as I ran diagnostics on the vertical launch system that housed our ship-to-ship missiles. 96 cells loaded with enough firepower to level a small city, and I knew every one of them intimately. I'd calibrated their guidance systems, optimized their flight paths, and debugged their targeting software until I could predict their performance with mathematical precision. But according to Navy regulations, I was just a weapons systems specialist. I wasn't authorized to actually fire them in combat. My name is Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez, and 6 months ago, I thought I knew exactly where my career was headed. The same place it had been headed since I graduated top of my class from the Naval Academy's Weapons Engineering program. Straight into the technical side of naval warfare, forever debugging systems that other people got to use in the real world. The Combat Information Center aboard the USS Meridian was my domain in every way except the one that mattered. I knew every wire in the Aegis combat system, every line of code in our missile guidance computers, every quirk and capability of our Mark 41 vertical launch system. When our missiles malfunctioned during training exercises, I could diagnose the problem before the error messages even appeared on screen. When our targeting radar suffered interference, I could compensate using backup systems that most tactical officers didn't even know existed. But I'd never been allowed to fire a shot in anger. "Vasquez, I need a system status report now," barked Commander Harrison from his position at the tactical display. Harrison had been the ship's weapons officer for 2 years, and in that time, he'd managed to demonstrate a remarkable talent for following standard procedures, while completely missing the innovative applications that could make our systems truly devastating. "All systems nominal, sir," I reported, my fingers dancing across diagnostic screens that painted a picture of perfect readiness. VLS cells 1 through 40 loaded with SM-6 interceptors, cells 41 through 72 loaded with Tomahawk cruise missiles, cells 73 through 96 loaded with naval strike missiles. All guidance systems operational, radar painting clear targets, fire control computers showing green across the board. Harrison nodded absently, his attention focused on the tactical plot where enemy contacts continued to multiply. I watched him study the display with the kind of methodical intensity that suggested he was running through standard engagement procedures rather than adapting to the specific tactical situation developing around us. That was the difference between U.S. Harrison knew the book, I knew the weapons. The ship's intercom crackled to life with Captain Morrison's voice. "All hands, this is the captain. We have been ordered to intercept and engage a hostile naval force that has violated international waters. This is not a drill. All departments report readiness status immediately." I felt my pulse quicken as the reality of our situation sank in. This was actually happening. After 5 years of simulations and training exercises, we were going into real combat. and I would be watching from the sidelines while other people used weapon systems I understood better than they did. "Captain, this is Commander Harrison in CIC. Weapon systems report full readiness. All missiles armed and ready for engagement." The next voice over the intercom made me look up sharply. "Captain, this is Admiral Chun. I'm coming down to CIC to observe the engagement." Admiral Chen. I'd heard her name whispered in the corridors with a mixture of respect and apprehension. The youngest flag officer in the Pacific Fleet. She'd earned her stars through a combination of tactical brilliance and a reputation for promoting people based on capability rather than convention. I'd never met her personally, but I'd heard stories about officers whose careers had taken unexpected turns after serving under her command. The CIC door opened 5 minutes later, and Admiral Chun entered with the kind of quiet authority that made everyone in the room stand a little straighter. She was smaller than I'd expected, with graying hair pulled back in a regulation, bun and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of our combat systems with mathematical precision. "As you were," she said quietly, moving to observe the tactical display. Commander Harrison briefed me on the tactical situation. Harrison launched into a by-the-book assessment of enemy capabilities and our planned response. Standard engagement doctrine, textbook missile employment, and absolutely no recognition of the unique opportunities that our current positioning and systems configuration could provide. I bit my tongue and tried to focus on my diagnostic screens, but I couldn't help noticing the subtle changes in Admiral Chun's expression as Harrison spoke. "And what's your assessment of enemy countermeasures?" Admiral Chun asked when Harrison finished. "Standard electronic warfare capabilities, ma'am. We should be able to overwhelm their defenses with a coordinated salvo of 8 to 12 missiles per target." I winced internally. Harrison was planning to use brute force when surgical precision would be far more effective. Our current position gave us perfect geometry for a targeting solution that could achieve the same result with half the missiles, but that would require understanding the technical capabilities of our guidance systems in ways that went well beyond standard doctrine. Admiral Chun turned slightly and her gaze landed on me. "Lieutenant Commander, you're Vasquez, correct? The weapons systems specialist?" "Yes, ma'am." I straightened to attention, wondering how she knew my name. "I've read your technical reports on missile guidance optimization. Impressive work. What's your assessment of our current tactical situation?" The question hung in the air like a live wire. Commander Harrison was my direct superior, and contradicting his tactical assessment could end my career. But Admiral Chun was asking for my professional opinion, and giving anything less than complete honesty would be failing in my duty. "Ma'am, our current positioning provides an opportunity for a more sophisticated engagement profile. The enemy formation is spread across a wide front, but their electronic warfare ships are clustered in the center. If we use our SM-6 missiles in their terminal guidance mode and approach from multiple vectors simultaneously, we could neutralize their countermeasures with 3 missiles instead of 12, leaving us with additional firepower for follow-up engagements." Harrison's face flushed red. "Lieutenant Commander, you're out of line. Tactical employment decisions are not within your area of responsibility." Admiral Chun held up a hand. "Continue, Lieutenant Commander. Explain your reasoning." I took a deep breath and moved to the tactical display, my hands automatically tracing the optimal attack geometry. "Ma'am, the SM-6 has an active radar seeker that most people use in a fire-and-forget mode. But the missile also has a passive mode that can home in on enemy radar emissions. Their electronic warfare ships are painting us with targeting radar right now, which means they're essentially beaconed for our missiles to follow." I manipulated the display to show projected missile flight paths. "If we launch 3 missiles in passive mode with staggered timing, the first missile will force them to shut down their jamming radar to avoid being targeted. The second missile, launched 30 seconds later, will acquire the ships when they turn their radar back on to regain situational awareness. The third missile ensures that even if they try to switch to backup systems, we maintain targeting capability. Admiral Chun studied the display with intense focus. And this leaves us with how much additional firepower. 9 additional SM-6 South and all of our Tomahawks and Naval Strike Missiles, ma'am. More than enough to engage any follow-up threats or targets of opportunity. Harrison stepped forward, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Admiral, with respect, Lieutenant Commander Vasquez is a technician, not a tactical officer. This kind of complex engagement profile requires training and experience she simply doesn't have. Admiral Chun turned to look at him with the kind of calm intensity that made everyone in CIC hold their breath. Commander, in your assessment, would Lieutenant Commander Vasquez's proposed engagement profile work? Harrison opened his mouth, then closed it again. I could see him struggling with the fact that my technical analysis was sound, even if he didn't want to admit it. Theoretically, yes, ma'am. But the risk of mechanical failure or pilot error. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez, Admiral Chun interrupted. Have you ever actually programmed and fired missiles using the engagement profile you just described? Not in combat, ma'am, but I've run full simulations dozens of times. The guidance algorithms are stable, the timing is well within system parameters, and the failure modes are all manageable. Admiral Chun nodded slowly. Commander Harrison, I want you to prepare a standard engagement plan as backup. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez, you'll program the missiles for your engagement profile. We'll use your plan as our primary attack, with Commander Harrison's approach held in reserve. The CIC fell silent, except for the hum of electronic systems and the distant vibration of the ship's engines. I felt every eye in the room focused on me as the weight of what had just happened settled in. I was going from technical advisor to tactical planner in the middle of our first real combat engagement. Harrison's voice was ice cold. Ma'am, I must protest this decision. Weapons employment is not within Lieutenant Commander Vasquez's chain of responsibility. Admiral Chun turned to face him fully. Commander, your protest is noted and overruled. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez has demonstrated technical knowledge that exceeds standard doctrine, and her proposed engagement profile offers tactical advantages that our current situation demands. This is combat, not a training exercise. I will use every asset at my disposal to accomplish the mission. She turned back to me. Lieutenant Commander, you have 15 minutes to program your missiles and verify your targeting solution. After that, we'll find out if your technical expertise translates to tactical effectiveness. I moved to my console with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. This was it. 5 years of studying these systems, understanding their capabilities, and dreaming of the opportunity to use them in real combat had led to this moment. I had 15 minutes to prove that technical mastery could translate to tactical success. As I began programming the missile guidance computers with targeting parameters that pushed their capabilities to the absolute limit, I felt something I'd never experienced before. For the first time in my naval career, I wasn't just maintaining weapons systems or providing technical support. I was about to find out if I really understood warfare well enough to win a battle. The enemy fleet was 45 miles away and closing. In a few minutes, I would either prove that I belonged in tactical command, or I would fail spectacularly in front of the one admiral who had been willing to give me a chance. Either way, my career would never be the same. The tactical planning session aboard USS Meridian lasted until 3 in the morning, with holographic displays painting the CIC in shifting blues and reds as my staff, and I analyzed every aspect of the enemy formation. Captain Rodriguez from USS Columbia and Captain Kim from USS Phoenix had initially greeted my appointment as task force commander with polite skepticism, but as we worked through the tactical challenges, their attitudes shifted to something approaching enthusiasm. The enemy's electronic warfare vessels are positioned here and here, I said, manipulating the three-dimensional tactical display to highlight key targets. They're using a layered defense strategy that assumes we'll engage with conventional missile salvos from maximum range. But their positioning creates a vulnerability they probably don't realize exists. Captain Rodriguez leaned forward, studying the display with professional interest. What kind of vulnerability? I zoomed in on the enemy formation, highlighting the spacing between their defensive ships. They're maintaining 20-kilometer intervals between major combatants to minimize the effectiveness of nuclear warheads. But that spacing also means their individual air defense systems can't provide overlapping coverage against low-altitude threats approaching from specific vectors. Captain Kim traced the gaps in enemy coverage with her finger. You're talking about threading missiles through their defensive envelope. The timing would have to be perfect. More than perfect, I replied. It would require coordinating over 200 individual missiles across 3 ships, with launch timing calculated to the second and flight paths optimized for terrain masking and electronic countermeasures. We're essentially choreographing a ballet where every dancer is a guided weapon system. The concept I was proposing went far beyond anything in naval warfare. Instead of overwhelming enemy defenses with brute force, we would exploit the mathematical precision of modern missile guidance systems to achieve surgical strikes against specific targets in a predetermined sequence. Captain Rodriguez whistled softly. Commander, this is either brilliant or completely insane. How confident are you in these calculations? I looked at the tactical display where red enemy contacts outnumbered our blue friendlies by 4-1. Confident enough to stake my career on it. And more importantly, confident enough to stake the lives of everyone in this task force. At dawn, our 3 ships took position 52 miles from the enemy fleet, just outside their maximum missile range but well within ours. The morning sun painted the Pacific in shades of gold and blue, creating an almost peaceful backdrop for what would become the most complex naval engagement in modern history. All stations report ready, announced Lieutenant Palmer from the communications console. USS Columbia and USS Phoenix are standing by for coordinated launch sequence. I stood at the tactical coordination station, surrounded by displays that showed the real-time status of every weapon system across our task force. 288 missiles distributed across 3 ships, each one programmed with specific targeting data and flight parameters that I'd calculated during the night's planning session. Admiral Chun sends her regards, Palmer reported. She's monitoring from Pacific Fleet Command and has given us complete tactical autonomy for this engagement. The weight of command settled across my shoulders like a familiar coat. 6 months ago I'd been maintaining these weapon systems and dreaming of using them tactically. Now I was orchestrating the most sophisticated missile engagement in naval history, with the careers and lives of hundreds of sailors depending on the accuracy of my calculations. Enemy fleet is maintaining course and speed, reported the radar. Operator, range 49 miles and closing slowly. They appear to be in standard defensive formation. I studied the tactical display one final time, verifying that every element of our engagement plan remained viable. The enemy's electronic warfare ships were positioned exactly where I'd predicted. Their air defense systems were configured for maximum defensive coverage against conventional threats. Most importantly, they were maintaining the precise formation, spacing that made my unconventional approach possible. All ships, this is Meridian Actual, I announced over the tactical frequency. Execute Engagement Plan Alpha. Launch authorization is granted. Initiate coordinated strike in 3, 2, 1. Execute. The deck shuddered beneath my feet as our first salvo of Tomahawk cruise missiles erupted from the vertical launch system. Through the CIC's observation windows, I watched similar launches from Columbia and Phoenix as all 3 ships began the carefully orchestrated missile ballet I'd designed. Wave 1 consisted of 60 Tomahawks programmed for ultra-low altitude approach profiles that would keep them below radar horizon until the final moments of engagement. Their targets were the enemy's electronic warfare vessels, whose destruction would blind the defensive formation and create gaps in their sensor coverage. Wave 1 missiles are tracking nominal, reported the weapons coordinator. Time to target: 6 minutes and 30 seconds. I watched the tactical display as our missiles followed precisely calculated flight paths, using terrain masking and electronic countermeasures to avoid detection. The enemy fleet continued on its original course, apparently unaware that death was approaching from below their radar horizon. Wave 2, launch authorization granted, I ordered. Our second salvo consisted of SM-6 missiles configured for high-altitude approach and terminal dive profiles. These missiles would arrive 15 seconds after Wave 1, targeting the enemy's air defense systems while they were still reacting to the Tomahawk strikes. The choreography was working exactly as I'd calculated. Each wave of missiles was timed to arrive precisely when the enemy's defensive systems would be most vulnerable, either from battle damage or from the confusion of trying to engage multiple simultaneous threats. Enemy formation is beginning evasive maneuvers, the radar operator announced. They've detected our incoming missiles and are attempting to disperse. I'd anticipated this response and planned for it. Wave 3, launch authorization granted. Execute dispersal target package. Our third and largest salvo consisted of naval strike missiles with terminal guidance systems that could adapt to moving targets. As the enemy ships scattered to avoid our incoming missiles, they were moving directly into the engagement envelopes I'd calculated for our NSMs. Wave 1 impact in 30 seconds, reported the weapons coordinator. All missiles tracking to target. I watched the tactical display with intense focus as our first wave of Tomahawks approached their targets. Everything depended on eliminating the enemy's electronic warfare capabilities before they could effectively coordinate their defensive response. Impact: multiple hits on enemy EW vessels. Enemy jamming has ceased. The tactical display immediately cleared as our sensors gained unobstructed views of the enemy formation. 2 of their electronic warfare ships had been completely destroyed, while a third was burning and listing heavily to port. Wave 2 impact in 15 seconds, the weapons coordinator announced. Our SM-6 missiles dove from high altitude like hunting falcons, their terminal guidance systems locked onto enemy air defense radars that were suddenly visible without electronic interference. The missiles struck their targets with devastating precision, eliminating the enemy's ability to coordinate defensive fire against our remaining waves. Multiple hits on enemy air defense units. Enemy defensive fire has decreased significantly. But the enemy wasn't finished. Their remaining ships began launching missiles of their own, and I watched red tracks appear on the tactical display as enemy weapons streaked toward our task force. Incoming missiles, bearing 095, range 32 miles, announced the air defense coordinator. Multiple contacts, estimated 40+ inbound. This was the moment I'd feared most. Our offensive plan was working perfectly, but now we had to defend against enemy retaliation while our remaining missiles were still in flight. All ships, execute defensive plan Delta, I ordered. Coordinated point defense, maximum engagement priority. Our 3 ships became a symphony of defensive fire as close-in weapons, systems and defensive missiles engaged the incoming enemy. Salvo. Streams of depleted uranium rounds from our phalanx guns created visible walls of metal in the air, while SM-2 defensive missiles reached out to intercept threats at maximum range. Wave 3 impact in 45 seconds, the weapons coordinator reported. All missiles tracking to target. I divided my attention between our ongoing offensive strike and the defensive battle raging around our ships. Enemy missiles were exploding in brilliant flashes as our defensive systems found their marks, but several weapons were leaking through our protective envelope. "Brace for impact," someone shouted. An enemy missile struck Columbia's forward section, sending a column of smoke and flame into the morning sky. But the ship maintained formation and continued engaging incoming threats with disciplined professionalism. "Columbia reports minor damage. All weapon systems remain operational," Palmer announced. "Wave 3 impact now," the weapons coordinator called out. Our final wave of naval strike missiles found their targets among the scattered enemy formation. With mathematical precision, the missile's advanced guidance systems had adapted to the enemy's evasive maneuvers, striking each target exactly where I'd calculated they would be most vulnerable. The tactical display painted a picture of complete tactical success. In 12 minutes of precisely coordinated missile strikes, we had eliminated 11 major enemy combatants and reduced their fleet to scattered survivors fleeing toward their home waters. "Enemy formation is withdrawing," reported the radar. "Operator, multiple ships showing battle damage. Several appear to be sinking." I stared at the tactical display in something approaching disbelief. It had worked. The unconventional engagement plan that existed nowhere in official doctrine had achieved complete tactical victory against numerically superior forces. We had just demonstrated that precision and innovation could triumph over conventional superiority. "Outstanding work, Commander." Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the tactical frequency. "That was the most impressive display of tactical coordination I've ever witnessed." Captain Kim added her congratulations, but I barely heard the words. I was focused on the larger implications of what we'd just accomplished. This engagement would change everything about how the Navy approached naval warfare. The combination of technical expertise and tactical innovation had proven that smaller forces could defeat larger ones through superior coordination and unconventional thinking. Admiral Chun's voice cut through the celebration. "Task Force Commander, this is Pacific Fleet Command. Congratulations on an outstanding victory. Return to base for immediate debriefing and mission analysis." As our task force turned toward home, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been a weapon systems specialist with dreams that everyone said were impossible. Today, I'd commanded the most sophisticated naval engagement in history and proven that technical mastery could translate into tactical brilliance. The enemy fleet was scattered and defeated, their threat to international shipping lanes permanently eliminated. And I had done it from 52 miles away, using nothing but missiles, mathematics, and the kind of innovative thinking that the Navy was finally beginning to value. My name would be remembered in naval history textbooks, but more importantly, the engagement would demonstrate that the future of naval warfare belonged to those who understood their weapons well enough to use them in ways their designers never imagined. They had said a weapons systems specialist could never command a fleet engagement. They had been spectacularly wrong. The debriefing session at Pacific Fleet Headquarters lasted 3 days and involved more admirals than I'd seen in one room during my entire naval career. The conference room's walls were lined with tactical displays showing frame-by-frame analysis of our engagement, with missile flight paths traced in precise detail and timing calculations verified to the millisecond. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Admiral Chun sat at the head of the table, flanked by the Pacific Fleet Commander and representatives from the Pentagon, who'd flown in specifically to understand how 3 destroyers had eliminated a superior enemy force using tactics that existed nowhere in official doctrine. I sat across from them with my after-action reports spread before me, feeling like a specimen under examination. "Commander Vasquez," began Admiral Morrison, the fleet commander, "your engagement report describes coordination of 288 individual missiles across 3 platforms with timing precision measured in seconds. How did you calculate these parameters without computer modeling support?" I pulled up the tactical analysis I'd prepared during the flight back to base. Sir, the calculations were based on established missile performance data combined with real-time assessment of enemy defensive positioning. Each weapon system has published flight characteristics and guidance capabilities. The innovation was in combining these systems in ways that exploited mathematical relationships between approach vectors and defensive coverage gaps. Admiral Foster from the Pentagon leaned forward, his expression skeptical. Commander, what you're describing represents a fundamental departure from established naval warfare doctrine. How do we know this wasn't simply luck rather than reproducible tactical innovation? The question struck at the heart of what this debriefing was really about. The Navy needed to determine whether my approach represented the future of naval warfare or was merely an isolated success that couldn't be replicated. My answer would determine not just my own career trajectory, but potentially the direction of naval tactical development for decades to come. Admiral, I've prepared a comprehensive analysis that demonstrates the mathematical principles underlying the engagement, I replied, activating the holographic display system. The tactics I employed aren't dependent on luck or unique circumstances. They're based on systematic exploitation of the geometric and temporal relationships between modern missile systems and traditional defensive formations. I walked them through the calculations step by step, showing how enemy defensive positioning had created predictable vulnerabilities that could be exploited by missiles approaching from specific vectors at predetermined intervals. The math was elegant in its simplicity once you understood the underlying principles. Admiral Chun spoke for the first time during the session. Commanders, what we witnessed wasn't tactical innovation in isolation. It was the logical result of combining deep technical knowledge with tactical application. Commander Vasquez understood our weapons systems well enough to use them in ways their designers never anticipated. The Pentagon representative made notes on his tablet. If we accept that this approach is reproducible, what are the implications for fleet tactics and force structure? The question opened a discussion that would reshape my understanding of my role in the Navy's future. Over the following hours, we examined how my engagement techniques could be adapted for different scenarios, scaled up for larger fleet actions, and integrated into existing operational doctrine. 2 weeks later, I found myself standing in the Navy War College's main auditorium, looking out at an audience of senior officers from across the fleet. The lectern before me held my presentation materials for what would become known as the Vasquez Doctrine, a comprehensive framework for precision missile employment in naval warfare. Traditional naval gunnery required ships to close within visual range of their targets. I began, my voice carrying clearly through the auditorium sound system. Modern missile warfare allows us to engage at ranges measured in hundreds of miles, but our tactical thinking hasn't evolved to match our technological capabilities. The presentation covered everything from basic targeting mathematics to complex multi-platform coordination techniques. I demonstrated how conventional defensive formations were optimized against threats that no longer represented the primary danger in modern naval warfare. Admiral Harrison, ironically enough, sat in the front row taking detailed notes. Since our initial confrontation, he'd become one of the most vocal advocates for adopting my tactical innovations, recognizing that personal pride was less important than naval effectiveness. The key insight, I continued, is that precision doesn't require overwhelming force. A single missile placed exactly where the enemy is most vulnerable is more effective than a dozen missiles fired without consideration for optimal impact timing and approach geometry. After my presentation, the War College's commandant approached me with an offer that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Commander Vasquez, we'd like you to establish a new department focused on advanced missile tactics. You would have complete authority to develop curriculum, select faculty, and define graduation standards for officers specializing in precision weapons employment. The opportunity represented everything I'd dreamed of and more. The chance to institutionalize innovative thinking within the Navy's educational structure, ensuring that future officers would understand weapons systems from both technical and tactical perspectives. But the most satisfying validation came 6 months later, during the annual Pacific Fleet exercises. I stood on the bridge of USS Constellation, now wearing the eagles of a full captain, watching as 12 ships executed coordinated missile strikes. Using tactics I'd developed, the engagement was flawless, with each ship contributing precise firepower at exactly the right moment to achieve overwhelming tactical effect. All targets eliminated, reported the exercise controller. Time from initial launch to final impact, 14 minutes and 23 seconds. Ammunition expenditure, 67% below doctrinal projections. Admiral Chun, now commander of Pacific Fleet, nodded approvingly from her position beside me. Captain Vasquez, your tactical innovations have reduced ammunition requirements, while increasing engagement effectiveness. That's the kind of efficiency the Navy needs as we face increasingly sophisticated threats. The exercises demonstrated something beyond tactical success. They proved that innovative thinking could be systematized and taught, transforming individual insight into institutional capability. Young officers were graduating from the War College with understanding of weapons systems that exceeded what senior commanders had possessed just a few years earlier. My personal journey had become part of a larger transformation within the Navy. The service was finally recognizing that technical expertise and tactical innovation were complementary rather than competing capabilities. Officers were being promoted based on their ability to think creatively about complex problems rather than simply following established procedures. The change wasn't without resistance. Traditional commanders argued that proven doctrine shouldn't be abandoned for unproven innovations. Conservative voices within the Pentagon questioned whether precision tactics would remain effective against adaptive enemies who learned to counter our new approaches. But the results spoke for themselves. Fleet exercises consistently demonstrated superior performance using precision missile tactics. Allied navies requested training in our new techniques. Most importantly, potential adversaries began modifying their own tactical approaches in response to capabilities they couldn't ignore. Standing on Constellation's bridge, watching the most complex naval exercise in history unfold with mathematical precision, I reflected on how far both my career and the Navy had traveled. The same weapon systems that had once been employed through brute force were now being used with surgical precision that maximized effectiveness while minimizing cost. The transformation extended beyond tactical innovation. The Navy's entire approach to officer development was evolving to emphasize technical depth alongside operational experience. Future commanders would understand their tools well enough to use them in ways that current doctrine couldn't anticipate. My communication device chimed with a message from the Secretary of the Navy. The Pacific Fleet exercises had attracted attention at the highest levels of government, with congressional defense committees requesting briefings on the tactical innovations that were revolutionizing naval warfare. "Captain," Admiral Chun said, "you've proven that expertise and innovation can overcome numerical superiority. More importantly, you've shown the Navy how to institutional that capability. The question now is what challenges you want to tackle next." I looked out at the Pacific horizon, where advanced missile destroyers were demonstrating tactics that would have been considered impossible just 2 years earlier. The Navy had given me the opportunity to prove that technical knowledge could translate into tactical brilliance. Now it was my responsibility to ensure that future officers would have the same opportunities to innovate and excel. The enemy fleet that had threatened international shipping was long gone, scattered to the bottom of the Pacific by missiles fired from precisely calculated positions 50 miles away. But the real victory wasn't that single engagement. It was the transformation of an entire service that now understood the difference between following doctrine and thinking. creatively about how to achieve tactical objectives. They had said a weapons systems specialist could never command fleet engagements. They had said technical expertise couldn't translate into tactical leadership. They had said innovative thinking was less valuable than proven procedures. History had proven them wrong on every count. The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning that felt like any other, delivered by a junior officer whose nervous demeanor suggested the contents were anything but routine. I sat in my office at the Advanced Naval Warfare Institute, surrounded by holographic displays showing missile trajectory calculations from the latest student exercises, when Lieutenant Morris knocked on my door with orders that would change everything once again. "Captain Vasquez, Admiral Patterson requests your immediate presence in the secure briefing facility," Morris said, his voice carrying the kind of formal tension that meant classified information of the highest order. I closed the tactical analysis. I'd been reviewing and followed Morris through corridors lined with portraits of naval heroes whose innovations had shaped maritime warfare throughout history. Soon, I realized with a mixture of pride and disbelief, my own portrait might join theirs on these walls. The secure facility was located 3 levels below ground, behind blast doors that could withstand nuclear detonation. Admiral Patterson waited inside with a collection of individuals whose presence immediately told me this briefing involved national security at the highest levels. The Secretary of Defense sat at the head of the conference table, flanked by the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Director of National Intelligence. "Captain Vasquez," Admiral Patterson began, "what I'm about to share cannot leave this room. 3 days ago, our intelligence assets detected preparations for a massive naval operation by hostile forces in the South China Sea. The scale and sophistication of this force represents the greatest threat to international maritime security in decades." The tactical displays activated, revealing satellite imagery that made my blood run cold. The enemy had assembled a fleet unlike anything seen since World War II, consisting of over 40 major surface combatants supported by submarines, aircraft carriers, and amphibious assault vessels. The formation stretched across hundreds of square miles of ocean, representing overwhelming conventional superiority. Their apparent objective is to establish permanent control over international shipping lanes that carry 30% of global maritime commerce, continued the Secretary of Defense. Economic modeling suggests that successful interdiction of these routes would trigger worldwide economic catastrophe within weeks. I studied the intelligence displays with growing understanding of why my presence had been requested. This wasn't simply a briefing about enemy capabilities. This was a consultation about response options that conventional naval doctrine couldn't address. "Sir, what's our available response capability?" I asked, though I suspected the answer would explain why civilian leadership had become involved. At such senior levels, Admiral Patterson manipulated the displays to show friendly force deployments across the Pacific. 2 carrier battle groups, 5 surface action groups, and supporting submarine assets. Approximately 60 major combatants against their 40-plus ships. Under normal circumstances, that would represent adequate force parity. The Chairman of the Joint Chiefs leaned forward. "But these aren't normal circumstances. Intelligence indicates their fleet includes advanced electronic warfare systems and missile defense capabilities that could neutralize conventional tactics. Traditional engagement doctrine would require overwhelming numerical superiority that we simply don't possess in the theater." The implications crystallized with devastating clarity. The enemy had studied our conventional tactics and developed countermeasures specifically designed to neutralize traditional fleet engagement methods. They were forcing us to choose between accepting their control of international waters or engaging in a battle we couldn't win using established doctrine. "Captain Vasquez," the Secretary of Defense said, "your tactical innovations have revolutionized small-scale naval engagements. The question we need answered is whether your approaches can be scaled up to fleet-level operations against sophisticated opponents who've prepared specifically to counter conventional American naval tactics. The weight of what they were asking settled across my shoulders like a lead blanket. They wanted me to develop tactical solutions for the largest naval engagement since the Pacific theater of World War II, against an enemy that had spent years preparing countermeasures for everything in our playbook except the innovations I'd pioneered. Sir, analyzing enemy capabilities and developing effective countermeasures would require access to classified intelligence well beyond my current clearance level. I'd also need detailed technical specifications for our available weapon systems and real-time intelligence on enemy formations and defensive positioning. The Director of National Intelligence spoke for the first time. Captain, as of this moment, you're granted top-secret, compartmentalized access to all intelligence assets relevant to this operation. You'll have complete access to satellite surveillance, signals intelligence, and technical specifications for both friendly and enemy systems. Your analysis and recommendations will be provided directly to the President for strategic decision-making. Over the following 72 hours, I immersed myself in intelligence data that painted a picture of enemy preparation unlike anything in modern naval history. They hadn't simply assembled a large fleet. They had created an integrated combat system designed specifically to counter American naval advantages through coordinated electronic warfare, layered missile defenses, and tactical formations that minimized our traditional strengths. But their preparations also revealed weaknesses that conventional analysis had missed. Their reliance on coordinated defense systems created dependencies that could be exploited through precisely timed attacks on critical nodes. Their electronic warfare capabilities were optimized against traditional American tactics but vulnerable to unconventional approaches that targeted their coordination systems rather than their individual platforms. Most importantly, their massive fleet size created logistical challenges that imposed predictable constraints on their maneuvering and positioning. They were powerful but inflexible, capable of overwhelming conventional attacks, but vulnerable to tactical approaches that exploited their size as a liability rather than an asset. The tactical plan I developed over those 3 days represented the most complex military operation I'd ever conceived. Instead of engaging their fleet directly, we would systematically dismantle their capability through coordinated strikes against their supporting infrastructure, electronic warfare systems, and command coordination nodes. The operation would require precise timing across multiple battle groups operating hundreds of miles apart, with missile salvos coordinated to arrive at specific targets within seconds of each other. We would use their size against them, forcing them to defend everywhere, simultaneously while we concentrated our attacks against carefully selected critical vulnerabilities. The enemy's strength is their integrated defense system, I explained to the assembled admirals during my briefing. But integration creates dependencies. Eliminate the right nodes in the right sequence, and their defensive coordination collapses. Once that happens, their numerical superiority becomes a liability because they can't coordinate effective responses to multiple simultaneous threats. Admiral Patterson studied the tactical projections with intense focus. Captain, you're proposing to engage a 40-ship fleet using tactics that require split-second coordination across forces operating at the absolute limits of their communication range. One timing error, one equipment malfunction, one intelligence failure could result in catastrophic losses. I'd anticipated this concern and prepared detailed contingency plans for every failure mode I could identify. Admiral, the plan includes backup protocols for every critical dependency. If primary coordination systems fail, we fall back to autonomous targeting using pre-programmed algorithms. If intelligence proves inaccurate, we have alternative target sets that exploit different vulnerabilities. The enemy has prepared for conventional tactics, but they can't prepare for approaches that don't exist in their tactical databases. The President's decision came 18 hours later through secure communication channels that bypassed normal military hierarchy. I was granted complete operational authority for the Pacific Fleet's response to the enemy threat, with authorization to implement whatever tactical measures I deemed necessary for mission success. Standing on the bridge of USS Enterprise, the fleet's newest and most advanced aircraft carrier, I watched the largest American naval formation since World War II prepare for battle. 6 carrier battle groups had been assembled under my operational command, representing over 90 ships and more firepower than most nations possessed in their entire military arsenals. But numbers meant nothing if they weren't employed effectively. The enemy fleet maintained its position in international waters, daring us to attack while confident that their defensive preparations would repel any conventional assault. They were about to discover that conventional assumptions could be as dangerous as conventional tactics. "All battle groups report ready for coordinated operations," announced Captain Williams, the Enterprise's commanding officer. "Fleet communications are established and synchronized. Weapons systems are armed and ready for engagement." I stood at the fleet coordination station, surrounded by displays showing the real-time status of every ship, aircraft, and weapon system under my command. The tactical plan that existed only in classified files and computer simulations was about to become reality in the most challenging naval engagement in modern history. Intelligence reports enemy fleet maintaining defensive formation at coordinates previously identified, reported the fleet intelligence officer. No indication they're aware of our approach or operational intentions. That would change within the next few hours. The operation I designed would announce itself dramatically when the first wave of missiles began eliminating their coordination capabilities. After that, success would depend on executing hundreds of precisely timed attacks with mathematical precision across thousands of square miles of ocean. "All battle groups, this is Fleet Actual," I announced over the tactical communication network. "Execute Operation Trident. Phase 1 launch authorization is granted. Initiate coordinated strike sequence." The first phase consisted of submarine-launched Tomahawk missiles targeting the enemy's satellite, communication systems, and shore-based radar installations. These strikes wouldn't directly damage their fleet, but they would blind their command structure and force them to rely on short-range communications that could be jammed or intercepted. "Phase 1 missiles are tracking nominal," reported the weapons coordinator. "Time to target, 11 minutes and 40 seconds. While our Tomahawks approach their targets, carrier-based aircraft launched with specialized electronic warfare equipment designed to disrupt enemy communications and targeting systems. The aircraft wouldn't engage directly, but they would create enough electromagnetic interference to mask our approach signatures and confuse enemy threat assessment. Phase 2 aircraft are airborne and proceeding to assign positions," announced the Air Operations Controller. "Electronic warfare pods are active and jamming enemy communications frequencies." The beauty of the plan was its psychological impact as much as its tactical effectiveness. Each phase would force the enemy to respond to threats they couldn't fully understand, while preventing them from coordinating effective countermeasures. They would know they were under attack, but be unable to determine the full scope of our intentions until it was too late to respond effectively. "Phase 1 impact confirmed," reported the intelligence officer. "Enemy satellite links are down. Shore-based radar installations have been neutralized. They're now operating with reduced situational awareness." The enemy fleet's response was exactly what I'd predicted. Unable to communicate with their strategic command structure, they began closing formation to improve their local coordination, while activating every defensive system they possessed. The maneuver brought them into the engagement envelope I'd calculated for our most devastating weapons. "Phase 3, launch authorization granted," I ordered. "Execute long-range precision strike." Our surface ships launched their Tomahawk missiles in the largest coordinated salvo in naval history. Over 200 cruise missiles streaked toward targets I'd identified as critical nodes in the enemy's defensive network. Electronic warfare ships, command vessels, and radar platforms that provided defensive coordination for the entire fleet. But the enemy wasn't helpless. Their defensive systems began engaging our missiles with impressive effectiveness, shooting down dozens of Tomahawks before they could reach their targets. The key was that they were focusing their defensive fire on obvious threats while missing the real danger approaching from unexpected directions. Phase 4 aircraft are beginning their attack runs, announced the Air Operations Controller. Stealth bombers are approaching from high altitude with precision-guided munitions, while the enemy concentrated on defending against our crews. Missiles B-2 stealth bombers approached from altitudes beyond their radar coverage. The aircraft carried specialized munitions designed to penetrate hardened targets and eliminate the enemy's most sophisticated defensive systems. Multiple hits on priority targets, reported the targeting coordinator. Enemy defensive coordination appears to be degrading significantly. The tactical display showed the enemy formation beginning to lose coherence as individual ship commanders made defensive decisions without central coordination. They were becoming a collection of individual vessels rather than an integrated combat system, exactly the transformation I designed the operation to achieve. Phase 5 launch authorization granted, I ordered. Execute fleet engagement sequence. Our final phase consisted of ship-to-ship missile attacks using the precision targeting techniques I'd pioneered months earlier. But instead of engaging 3 enemy vessels, we were coordinating attacks against 40 ships using tactics scaled up to fleet level for the first time in naval history. The missile salvo that followed made our previous engagements look modest by comparison. Over 400 ship-to-ship missiles launched from platforms distributed across hundreds of miles of ocean, each one programmed with targeting data and approach vectors calculated to arrive at optimal impact points within a 15-second window. All missiles tracking to target, reported the weapons coordinator. Estimated time to impact, 6 minutes and 30 seconds. I watched the tactical display as hundreds of red icons converged on the enemy formation from multiple directions. Simultaneously, the enemy's degraded defensive systems were engaging targets frantically, but they lacked the coordination necessary to stop a precisely orchestrated attack of this magnitude. Impact in 30 seconds, announced the weapons coordinator. Enemy defensive fire is scattered and uncoordinated. The results exceeded even my most optimistic projections. In less than 10 minutes, we had eliminated over half of the enemy fleet's major combatants and reduced the remainder to scattered survivors fleeing toward their territorial waters. The operation had achieved complete tactical success while expending fewer missiles than conventional doctrine would have required for engaging a force 1/4 the size. Outstanding work, Admiral, Captain Williams said, using the rank that everyone knew I would receive before the day was over. That was the most impressive display of tactical coordination in naval history. But the personal satisfaction was secondary to the strategic implications of what we'd accomplished. We had demonstrated that innovative tactics could overcome numerical superiority, even at fleet level, fundamentally changing the mathematics of naval warfare for decades to come. The aftermath of Operation Trident transformed not just my own career, but the entire structure of naval command and education. Within 6 months, I was promoted to Rear Admiral and given command of the Pacific Fleet's Tactical Innovation Command, a new organization dedicated to developing and implementing advanced naval warfare techniques. The Advanced Naval Warfare Institute, where I'd once taught, became the Navy's premier center for tactical innovation, with officers from allied navies attending courses in precision missile employment and fleet coordination techniques. The tactical principles I pioneered were being studied and adapted by military forces around the world, But perhaps the most meaningful validation came from the officers I trained, who went on to command their own vessels and battle groups. Captain Rodriguez, who'd been my student at the War College, successfully commanded a surface action group, using modified versions of my tactics during the crisis in the Mediterranean. Commander Thompson, another of my former students, revolutionized submarine warfare by applying precision targeting principles to underwater combat. Standing in my office overlooking the Pacific Fleet's main base, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from weapons systems specialist to the architect of modern naval tactics. The walls were lined with commendations from governments around the world, academic degrees from institutions that had created new fields of study based on my innovations, and photographs of fleet exercises that demonstrated tactical capabilities unimaginable just a few years earlier. My latest assignment represented the ultimate validation of everything I'd worked to achieve. The Secretary of Defense had asked me to establish a new Joint Service Command focused on precision warfare across all military domains. The Precision Strike Command would coordinate tactical innovation efforts across the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, ensuring that the principles I'd pioneered in naval warfare could be adapted to land and air operations. The command's headquarters occupied an entire floor of the Pentagon, with officers from every service working together to develop tactics that maximize the effectiveness of modern weapon systems. The same mathematical precision that had revolutionized naval missile employment was being applied to artillery targeting, air-to-ground munitions, and even infantry weapon systems. Admiral Patterson, now the Chief of Naval Operations, visited regularly to observe our progress and ensure that tactical innovation remained a priority throughout the military. During his most recent visit, he made a comment that captured the transformation that had occurred within the armed forces. "Admiral Vasquez," he said, "when you first briefed your tactical concepts 5 years ago, some people questioned whether precision could truly replace overwhelming force as the foundation of military strategy. Today, precision is our strategy. Every operation we plan, every weapon system we deploy, every tactical decision we make is based on mathematical optimization rather than brute force application." The change extended far beyond tactical innovation. The military's entire approach to officer development had evolved to emphasize technical depth alongside traditional leadership training. Officers graduating from service academies were required to demonstrate mathematical competency in systems analysis capabilities that would have been considered specialized technical skills just a decade earlier. Young lieutenants and ensigns were arriving at their first assignments with understanding of weapon systems that exceeded what senior commanders had possessed throughout most of my early career. They thought in terms of precision and optimization, rather than overwhelming force and attrition warfare. The transformation was global in scope. Allied nations had requested training in American precision tactics, leading to the establishment of international exchange programs that spread tactical innovation throughout the Western Military Alliance. Former adversaries were modifying their own strategic approaches in response to capabilities they could no longer ignore. Most importantly, the demonstration that precision could overcome numerical superiority had contributed to strategic stability by reducing the incentives for arms races based on platform quantities. Nations were investing in technological sophistication rather than massive military buildups, creating a more stable international security environment. My personal office contained memorabilia from engagements that had become case studies in military academies around the world. The original tactical displays from our first precision missile strike, photographs of the fleet formation that had dominated the South China Sea engagement, and communications from heads of state who'd witnessed the transformation of naval warfare firsthand. But the item I treasured most was a simple photograph taken during my early days as a weapons systems specialist, showing me performing routine maintenance on missile guidance systems that I would later use to revolutionize naval tactics. The image captured the journey from technical expertise to tactical innovation that had defined my career, and, ultimately, the evolution of modern warfare itself. The phone call that would define my legacy came on a quiet afternoon when I was reviewing proposals for the next generation of precision weapon systems. The President's Chief of Staff informed me that I was being considered for appointment as the first female chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a position that would make me the senior military advisor to the President and the highest-ranking officer in the American Armed Forces. Admiral Vasquez, the Chief of Staff, said, "Your tactical innovations have fundamentally changed how America approaches military challenges. The President believes that leadership capable of revolutionary thinking is exactly what our military needs as we face an increasingly complex global security environment." The appointment would represent the culmination of a journey that began with dreams of tactical command and evolved into responsibilities I could never have imagined. From maintaining missile systems to commanding fleets to potentially leading the entire American military establishment, each step had built upon the mathematical precision and innovative thinking that had driven my career from the beginning. The confirmation hearings before the Senate Armed Services Committee provided an opportunity to articulate the philosophical principles that had guided my approach to military innovation. Senator Williams, the committee chairman, asked the question that captured the essence of my career transformation. "Admiral Vasquez, you've revolutionized military tactics through what you describe as mathematical optimization and precision employment of weapon systems. How do these technical innovations translate into strategic advantages for American national security?" My answer drew upon lessons learned throughout 5 years of tactical innovation and fleet command. "Senator, precision warfare isn't simply about using fewer weapons to achieve the same results. It's about achieving strategic objectives that would be impossible using conventional approaches. When 3 destroyers can defeat a 40-ship fleet, when individual officers can coordinate attacks across thousands of miles of ocean, when mathematical optimization can overcome numerical superiority, we fundamentally change the strategic calculations that potential adversaries must consider." I continued, "The strategic advantage isn't just tactical effectiveness. It's the demonstration that American military innovation can adapt faster than potential threats, can develop countermeasures. Our precision capabilities force adversaries to invest massive resources in defensive measures while we continue innovating approaches they can't anticipate." The Senate confirmed my appointment by unanimous vote, making me the first woman and the youngest officer ever to serve as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The ceremony took place in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, surrounded by portraits of military leaders who had shaped American strategy throughout the nation's history. Standing at the podium where I would brief the President on military matters affecting global security, I reflected on the transformation that had brought me to this moment. The same mathematical precision that had guided my approach to missile targeting was now being applied to strategic planning at the highest levels of government. My first strategic briefing covered global security challenges that required the kind of innovative thinking I'd applied to naval warfare throughout my career. Terrorist networks that use distributed tactics to avoid conventional military responses, cyber warfare threats that targeted infrastructure rather than military platforms, and emerging technologies that blurred the traditional boundaries between warfare domains. "Mr. President," I concluded, "the strategic challenges we face require the same approach that revolutionized naval tactics. Precision application of our capabilities rather than overwhelming deployment of conventional forces. Mathematical analysis of enemy vulnerabilities rather than brute force attacks against their strengths. Innovation that adapts faster than threats can evolve countermeasures." The President nodded thoughtfully. "Admiral, your tactical innovations have proven that precision can overcome superior numbers in naval warfare. Can these same principles be applied to the broader challenges of national security strategy?" The question opened discussions that would reshape American strategic thinking for decades to come. The precision warfare principles I'd pioneered in naval operations were being adapted to counter-terrorism operations, cyber warfare, and diplomatic initiatives that required mathematical precision rather than overwhelming force. Over the following months, I worked with intelligence agencies to develop targeting strategies that identified critical nodes in terrorist networks and enemy infrastructure. The same mathematical analysis that had revealed vulnerabilities in naval formations was being applied to organizational structures, financial networks, and communication systems. The results were remarkable. Counter-terrorism operations achieved unprecedented success rates while minimizing collateral damage and civilian casualties. Cyber warfare capabilities neutralized enemy infrastructure with surgical precision that avoided escalation while demonstrating American technological superiority. Most importantly, the strategic approach based on precision and mathematical optimization was creating deterrent effects that reduced the likelihood of conflict entirely. Potential adversaries were discovering that American capabilities could neutralize their advantages before they could be effectively employed, fundamentally altering their strategic calculations. The briefing room in the White House Situation Room became a familiar environment where I presented strategic assessments that combined technical analysis with tactical innovation. Cabinet members, intelligence directors, and diplomatic officials learned to think in terms of precision targeting and mathematical optimization rather than conventional force deployment. During one particularly significant briefing, the Secretary of State asked a question that captured the transformation I'd helped bring about in American strategic thinking. Admiral Vasquez, your approach to military challenges emphasizes precision and innovation over conventional force application. How does this philosophy translate into diplomatic and economic strategies for advancing American interests globally? The answer required drawing connections between tactical innovation and grand strategy that represented the culmination of everything I'd learned throughout my career. Madam Secretary, precision warfare demonstrates American technological superiority while minimizing the political costs associated with military operations. When our adversaries know that we can achieve strategic objectives using minimal force applied with mathematical precision, they're more likely to seek diplomatic solutions rather than military confrontation. I continued, the strategic message isn't just about military capability. It's about demonstrating that American innovation can solve complex problems more effectively than traditional approaches. That demonstration extends beyond military affairs to economic competition, technological development, and diplomatic initiatives. The meeting concluded with presidential direction to apply precision warfare principles to a comprehensive review of American grand strategy. The mathematical optimization and innovative thinking that had revolutionized naval tactics were being incorporated into diplomatic, economic, and technological strategies for advancing American interests globally. Looking back on the journey from weapons systems specialist to chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I realized that the transformation hadn't just been personal. It represented a fundamental evolution in how America approached strategic challenges. In an increasingly complex world, the same mathematical precision that had guided my first missile targeting calculations was now being applied to strategic decisions affecting global security. The innovative thinking that had revolutionized naval warfare was reshaping American grand strategy for the 21st century. Young officers graduating from military academies were arriving at their assignments with capabilities that exceeded what senior commanders had possessed throughout most of military history. They understood weapon systems, strategic planning, and tactical innovation in ways that would define military effectiveness for decades to come. The transformation extended beyond American military forces to allied nations, international organizations, and global security architecture. The demonstration that precision could overcome numerical superiority had contributed to strategic stability while advancing technological innovation that benefited civilian applications as well as military capabilities. Standing in my Pentagon office surrounded by strategic planning documents that would shape American security policy for years to come, I reflected on the mathematical elegance of the journey that had brought me to this position. Every tactical innovation, every strategic insight, every leadership challenge had built upon the foundation of precise thinking and innovative problem-solving. The enemy fleet that had once threatened international shipping lanes was long forgotten, relegated to historical footnotes about conflicts resolved through tactical innovation rather than massive military confrontation. But the strategic principles developed during that engagement continued to influence American military thinking at the highest levels. My final reflection involved the mathematical equation that had guided my entire career. Precision plus innovation plus persistent effort equals transformation that exceeds the sum of individual components. The formula had worked for naval tactics, strategic planning, and ultimately the evolution of American military leadership itself. They had said a weapons systems specialist could never command fleet engagements. They had said technical expertise couldn't translate into strategic leadership. They had said innovative thinking was less valuable than traditional approaches to military challenges. History had proven them wrong in ways they could never have imagined. The legacy wasn't just the tactical innovations or strategic transformations I'd helped bring about. It was the demonstration that mathematical precision and innovative thinking could revolutionize any field where complex problems required creative solutions. Future generations of military leaders would build upon the foundation of precision warfare, applying mathematical optimization and innovative thinking to challenges that hadn't yet emerged. The transformation would continue long after my own retirement, guided by principles that had proven their effectiveness across every domain of military operations. The phone calls from young officers seeking career advice, the academic papers analyzing tactical innovations I'd pioneered, and the strategic planning documents that incorporated precision warfare principles, all represented elements of a transformation that extended far beyond any individual contribution. Mathematics had guided the trajectory that brought me from routine maintenance tasks to strategic leadership at the highest levels of government. The same equations that governed missile flight paths had shaped the career progression that demonstrated how technical expertise could evolve into revolutionary leadership. Standing at the window overlooking the Potomac River, where American military leaders had planned strategic operations for more than 2 centuries, I understood that the true victory hadn't been any single engagement or tactical innovation. It had been proving that precision thinking and mathematical optimization could transform not just individual careers, but entire institutions and strategic approaches. The fleet engagement that had established my reputation was now studied in military academies around the world as an example of how innovative thinking could overcome conventional limitations. But the real lesson wasn't about naval tactics or missile employment. It was about the power of mathematical precision applied to complex challenges through persistent effort and innovative problem-solving. The journey from weapons systems specialist to chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff represented more than career advancement. It demonstrated that technical expertise, mathematical precision, and innovative thinking could revolutionize any field where complex problems required creative solutions. They had said she couldn't launch missiles. They had said technical knowledge couldn't translate into tactical leadership. They had said innovative thinking was less important than traditional approaches. The mathematical precision that had guided every step of the journey proved them wrong in ways that would influence American strategic thinking for generations to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.